Today I'm going to show you 3 micro interactions that take your Squarespace buttons from simple to refined. I'm going to be using CSS and built-in variables so that everything stays in sync with your theme. So today I'm going to be building these interactions on this page here where I have the primary, secondary, and tertiary buttons over these 3 backgrounds. So you can see how these buttons change over different color schemes. So the built-in classes that Squarespace has are these here. They have Squarespace button element primary, and then they have the same class name with secondary and tertiary. They also have this SQS block button element, which will affect all buttons. And you can see this if you inspect the styles in Squarespace and bring up the inspector. You'll see that there is SQS button element primary and SQS block button element. If I select the secondary one, you can see this has SQS button element secondary, but it also has SQS block button element. So this SQS block button element is a global class for all buttons. So anything you do here is going to affect all of the buttons. So let me show you an example of what this global class is. So SQS block button element, anything I do here will affect all of the buttons in the layout. So if I change the color to red, you'll notice all the text in all of the buttons is red now. But if I take that out, say I just want to affect the primary one, you'll see all of my primary buttons now just have red text. So that's what the difference is between these classes. So like I was saying, this is the one, the SQS block button element is going to affect every button on here. But you can also target every instance of one of these, whether it's primary, secondary, or tertiary, and you can make changes to all of those. I'm going to start first with something simple here on the primary button only. And I want to start with the simple example of just scaling the button size just a little bit once you hover over it. So one thing that CSS has is it has these classes called pseudo classes. Those define the state of an element. So in this instance, we want the state to only affect hover. So what we'll do is we're going to take our class, we're going to add our pseudo class of hover. And here we want to increase the scale a little bit. So we're going to add transform, scale, and I'm just going to increase it a tiny bit. And you'll see that the button is just growing a little bit here. Only on primary, not the others. So if we want to add something a little smoother, we can add a transition here. So what I'm going to do is the main class is add a transition, and I'm just going to apply it to all. So now you see there's a little bit of motion when it scales up. One thing I want to add to this effect is I want to add a little bit of a shadow when it grows so that it looks like it's casting a little bit of a shadow when the button gets closer to you. So we could do that by adding our box shadow. And now you'll see there's just the slightest little shadow behind the button when it scales up. Now that we have that effect on the primary button, you can apply that to all the buttons by using the global class that we talked about earlier. So I'm just going to move this over to the global class, and I'm going to add the hover pseudo class to this one. And I'm just going to take that effect out and put it here. So now we still have it on primary, but now we're seeing it on all of our buttons. That's one of the benefits of using the global class is we can apply these interactions to everything and then just build off of those in the individual instances. Now we're going to work on creating the swipe effect for this secondary button. So what we want to do is we want to have the background fill from left to right here. There's a number of things we need to do to make this work. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete this first primary class that we had there. And we're just going to focus on this secondary element. One of the first things we want to do is remove the default behavior of changing that background color on hover. The way we do that is we're going to set the background to just stay transparent on hover. So now when we go over our secondary buttons, it's not changing color anymore. You can see the text color changing, but that background isn't changing. So this is where we get into another pseudo class. We're going to use the before pseudo class here. And this is basically to create another element in CSS that we can manipulate without affecting the original one. So this before pseudo class is basically saying put this right before the element that's already on the page. And we'll create a blank content item, and we want this positioned absolute. And then we want the inset to be 0, 0, 0, 0. And that's basically the same as top, bottom, left, and right. It's just a shorthand for that, but you could write it either way. So what we want to do is set the Z index to -1 because we want this to be behind our button. If we don't do this, it's just going to sit on top of our button and it's going to cover our text. We're going to access our first variable here in Squarespace. We want the background to be the background color of the button we already defined. I'll show you how these variables work. If you inspect, you will see items in the CSS that have this var before them. And these are CSS variables. So you can see numerous variables here that Squarespace has created for us, like our font family, the font styles, font weights, but we want to find the background color. And you can see right here, we have a variable, secondary button background color. And that's what we want to use. Since we already defined that in our Squarespace styles, we just want to piggyback off those because we don't want to hard code hex values here in case we were to change that or you want to use this on a different theme. So we're going to use var and we're just going to paste in that variable we took out and see that changed the color using the background color that is defined for each color theme here. So it's using orange by default here and that darker color by default here. One thing you're going to notice here is it's a lot larger than the original button because we're not using the fill version of the button. We're using fit. Right now it's behaving like as if we had fill and we're using fit. To fix that, you want to put a statement in the original button, a declaration of position relative. And now you see these buttons are the same size now. So what this does is this allows it to work in both fit and fill. Very important that you use that or else it's always going to make it the size of fill. So let's just finish off our other pseudo element here. What we want this to do, by default, we don't want to show it. So we're going to set the X scale to 0. And you'll see now they disappeared. We want the transform origin here to be 0, 0. And that's X and Y. On the hover state, not this hover state, we're going to create a new hover state for the pseudo element. So you can chain those. So there's hover before, and this is just going to have the transform scale X value. And we're just going to set this to 1 because we want it to be full scale. Let's see. Oh, there it is. Yeah. Important that you add the duration there. So now it's swiping from left to right. And you can see we still have that scale and shadow effect in there. So this is working on all of them. And you can see even with the dark background, we have an orange swipe effect. For the third effect on the tertiary button, I want to do something that builds off of what we did here on the secondary button, but I want to create an effect that has more of like a 3D effect. So this underline, I want it to appear like it's going to flip forward. So we can actually use a lot of this code that we've written for the secondary buttons. So I'll take everything that we've created there and add it to tertiary. And we're going to create this same pseudo element that we created in the secondary button. So the same concept of having another element added that we can manipulate separately without affecting the original. So let me just rename this. And then we'll take the hover class of the pseudo element. Let me change this to tertiary. So one of the differences with this effect is we don't want to use scale. We want to use rotate. So I'm going to change scale to rotate here. And you can see that it already covered our buttons up since it's rotating on the x-axis and currently it's set to 0. It's showing our element right now. So we can hide that by rotating it 90 degrees and now it's not visible anymore. So what we want the animation to be on hover is we want rotate X to be 0. So when you hover, it rotates. But this looks weird because it's coming from the top, not the bottom. So this is where the origins come into play. So we have X and Y. We want to have that Y origin be 100% so that it comes from the bottom. But it looks like it's filling on the way up. It doesn't really look much like a rotation. So you can fix this by adding some perspective. In the main class here for the tertiary button, we can add perspective. So now you can see this has a little bit of depth, but we're looking at it from a different angle. We need to mess with this transform variable here. And you can see the more I increase it, the flatter it gets. So now it looks like it's laying flat from our perspective. So now when you hover, it looks like it's flipping up. The problem we have here is that the border is changing color on hover also, and we want to keep it the same color. So what we want to do to this hover element is we want to make sure that the border color stays the same. So let's add border color. We're going to use our variables again. We're going to use this tertiary background color so that it matches. And now our border doesn't change and it looks a little smoother. And you can see it's also respecting the color in the dark theme. There's one more detail I want to cover before we wrap this up, and that's giving feedback when a button has been clicked. If we take all of our buttons, there's another pseudo class available that's called active. So what I want to happen is when someone clicks on one of these buttons, I want it to look like it's been pushed down. In order to do that, we need to scale it down just a little bit. All we have to do to show that effect is use this active pseudo class, and we can add a transform to that. And then we can just change the scale to that just a little bit. And what this is going to do is it's just going to shrink it a little bit when anyone clicks on it. The nice thing about this is that it also will work on mobile. So mobile won't have the scale up, but they will get the shrink when they click. So they'll get some sort of feedback. And this is just a small touch that just enhances the experience a little bit. So you can see I hover, and once I click, it shrinks a little bit. So they're giving the illusion that they're getting pressed as you click or tap on them. Intentional motion tied to your theme's variables keeps everything in sync and enhances your site's design. It also enhances the experience for your visitors. So if you found this helpful and want to see more, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.